President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president.
This has been perhaps the most embarrassing week of Joe Biden's presidency. After being accused of having a poor memory, he tried to defend himself at an emergency press conference, but he ended up in a muddle yet again, confusing Egypt's president with the leader of Mexico. In contrast, his great adversary, Vladimir Putin, was showing off his stamina by giving a more than 2-hour interview to Tucker Carlson in Moscow. Most Americans now think that Biden is too old for a second term. So is this the moment his party decides to replace him?
How bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad I let you speak.
A sharp little quip from Joe Biden shows he's still got his sense of humour, but it's beginning to feel like gallows humour. The president is on the ropes like never before. Special counsel Robert Hur, looking into Biden's handling of classified documents after he was vice president, when he was just a private citizen, concluded that he had willfully retained and disclosed classified materials. His report concluded such action presents serious risks to national security. But Hur decided not to prosecute, noting that Biden presented himself as a well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory.
President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that one of the reasons you were not charged is because, in his description, you are a well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation.
If Biden is not going to be charged, he said, that's up to them. You know, look, if he's not going to be charged, that's up to them. But then I should not be charged. I don't know that it's Biden, because I don't think he knows he's alive.
Anyway.
Back to that Biden press conference, and the unusually hostile questions kept coming.
Why are you confusing the names of world leaders?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. I did not share classified information. I did not share it.
With your ghostwriter?
With my ghostwriter, I did not. Guarantee you did not.
But the special counsel said in the report
he
that
did not say that.
Actually, he did. The report from special counsel Robert Hur says Mr. Biden shared information, including some classified information, with his ghostwriter. And just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, at the end of the press conference, Biden made this ill-fated U-turn to defend his record on the Middle East.
No, don't stop. Wait, hold on, sir, don't. No, you killed this. Take the W. What are you doing? Do not go.
The president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Biden clearly didn't mean to say Mexico, he meant to say Egypt. But given this press conference was all about proving his mental acuity, it was a big mistake and a big target for his rivals. Donald Trump's team put out this satirical map showing Mexico bordering Gaza and Israel.
Gaza and Mexico do not share a border.
There's no doubt the press is getting tougher with Joe Biden, which leads some to speculate that the Democrats are getting ready to replace him before the election.
A lot of people are wondering why the White House would allow old Joe to actually do this. The logical answer is that they're trying to throw him under the bus and pave the path for Gavin Newsom.
While in Washington, mainstream media journalists are finally baring their teeth, over in Moscow, Tucker Carlson was in relatively meek form when facing Vladimir Putin.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day.
Now, the interview was hardly a grilling, but Putin was able to answer Tucker Carlson's questions for well over 2 hours. You may not like the answers, but if nothing else, it showed the president's stamina. Russia's leader has sat across the table from 5 US presidents since taking power 24 years ago. Who was the toughest and who was the weakest? For many of us, that may be up for debate, but for Donald Trump, the answer is clear.
Putin never would have gone into Ukraine if it weren't for the incompetence of this administration. If I were president, and I say this, I will end that war in one day. It'll take 24 hours.
In polls, Trump has the edge on Biden for the race to the White House. But his recent remarks on NATO have made the front pages for all the wrong reasons.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
OK, let's bring in our first two guests now. And we have Scottie Nell Hughes. She is a Republican political commentator who feels that President Biden is now a dangerous liability. We also have Eric Ham, a political analyst who says Biden's memory is not a disaster and will not reduce support for him in the presidential election. Welcome, both of you. Scottie, it is said by the special counsel that the president has a poor memory, and that's one of the reasons why he's not prepared to take the matter further. What is so concerning for you about that?
Well, let's first off look at the reason why we're having this conversation is because Republicans for the last 3 years have continuously brought up the issue of the cognizant ability of the president of the United States, the current president. And so if there would not have been signs and little red flags over the last 3 years, then this report by the special counsel could be completely ignored. But what this did was actually put it into a piece of writing, has actually put it down that a man who is commander-in-chief of the United States military is unfit, unable to stand trial because he would be seen, I want to quote, an elderly man with poor memory. That should be very alarming and very concerning considering everything that is going on right now in our world today that the U.S. is involved in.
Eric, within that report, the special counsel Robert Hur said that the President of the United States couldn't remember when he was vice president, couldn't remember within a number of years when his son died. And then later, during the press conference designed to dispel any concerns, President Biden mixed up the presidents of Mexico and Egypt. Can you understand why a lot of people are concerned?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this has been an issue that has dogged President Biden for quite some time. In fact, heading into the election, this is going to be his Achilles heel. And he is going to struggle with this unless he actually confronts the issue. We saw Donald Trump actually take his many legal entanglements and actually turn that into fuel, which is now he's the GOP frontrunner. President Biden actually has to do the same thing with the issue of his age. Otherwise, this is going to continue to dog him between now through November.
And it's not just memory, is it, Eric? I mean, the Republicans and other commentators are accusing President Biden of lying at his press conference, or at the very best, misremembering or misrepresenting. And on 3 points in particular, he said at the press conference that the documents were not top secret or classified. He said he hadn't divulged them. And he said that they were locked away. On all 3 points, CNN, of all networks, actually fact-checked him and contradicted him.
Well, I'm not going to take anything as what CNN says. What we do know about the report is that the report actually opted not to actually prosecute Joe Biden at this time. And so I think that's the ultimate fact, the ultimate arbiter of what we need to glean from this report. I think we also need to recognize how troubling it is that you have a special counsel who gave us 20% fact and 80% editorializing. And I think that's a problem, particularly when you look at the wall of independence between the White House and the Department of Justice. And we're also in an election year. And so I think that is perhaps problematic.
Yes, he was nominated by President Trump, but he's still part of the Biden Justice Department.
That may be true, and we certainly have no quibbles with that. But nevertheless, what we don't want is we do not want, much like with James Comey and Hillary Clinton, there should not be any hint of political antics in an election year. And when we look at this report, there should just be facts. Is there a cause for an indictment? Is there an indictment? And if not, just simply state that. I think everything else was a bit over the top in what we got and what we saw from him.
Right. Scottie, a lot of commentators have noticed that the press, as I said, even CNN and a few others, are really going after Joe Biden now. Is that a clear indication that the Democratic Party is getting ready to replace Joe Biden before the election?
Oh, make no mistakes. Democrats love this. Even probably it's Republicans that are probably more in fear right now because Republicans are not good at long-term planning. And Republicans do not know what to do if they get to the DNC and they decide to replace Joe Biden with a Michelle Obama or even a Gavin Newsom. Republicans will be in complete panic mode. So at this point, I think it's Democrats that are actually liking the fact that they have a backup plan, a very viable backup plan that will not disenfranchise the Biden supporter if he is not able to fulfill the top of the ticket duties. But I do want to go back to something that my colleague's saying. I love the fact that Democrats like to point out the James Comey-Hillary Clinton connection. You look at, obviously, right now what's going on with Kerr and Biden. They forget everything in between, the 91 cases against Donald Trump with the Department of Justice. You want to talk about a coercion going on between the Biden administration and the DOJ. There is something completely demonstrated right now with everything going against Donald Trump. So at least we can all agree that somehow there's political ties between the White House and the DOJ. The question is, who's actually the real target of it and what is the actual goal of it?
Pick up on that point very briefly, and I have one last question for you, Eric. Trump complains of a two-tiered system of, what does he call it, lawfare. Do you think that's happening here?
No, absolutely not. In fact, we know that Donald Trump is not only being indicted by the federal government, but we know that there are other jurisdictions that are also indicting or looking at criminal activity from the former president, both in Georgia as well as in Manhattan. And these are very serious cases. And we know that these are going to be issues that a jury of Donald Trump's peers are going to determine his guilt or innocence, not politicians.
Eric, one last question for you, and it's about the American people. A recent poll taken after the special prosecutor said that Biden had a poor memory reveals that 59% of Americans think that both candidates are too old. Just another 3% think that only Trump is too old, and an additional 27% think that only Biden is too old. So that means 86% of people, nearly 9 out of 10 Americans, think that Biden is too old. Do you think it is time that the Democrats replace him?
I think that's something that the American people are going to have to decide.
Well, they won't get a chance if he's the only candidate up against Trump.
And then again, that will be an issue for the voters to decide.
Yeah. Scottie?
Democrats want to be like Marie Antoinette. They want to have their cake and eat it too. The reality of it is you can't play the old card because Donald Trump is older than Joe Biden. And he's obviously doing a lot better job of at least remembering certain key important dates within his lifetime.
Scottie, Nell, Hughes and Eric Ham, thank you both very much for your contributions today. Much appreciated. Now, earlier we heard how nearly 9 out of 10 Americans think that Biden is too old for a second term. But what about other nationalities? He is supposed to be the leader of the free world, after all. Here's a small sample that we spoke to here in London.
Do you think Joe Biden is too old to run for re-election?
Far too old. I think he's really old. US should get a new president. It's the strongest country in the world. If the person leading the country is not strong, we'll all be in trouble.
We can obviously see that he's too old for the job. And I think he's making a mockery of any type of politics or presidents.
He's proven over the last few weeks that his decision-making skills are slightly flagging, and he's not as strong as he was when he came into office.
He looks a bit too frail, and the older they get, the worse their decision-making gets.
I don't think it does matter older for me, and I think he's nice.
I think he's senile, so should get somebody else a bit younger.
Let's move on to the other president we're looking at this week, and that interview with Vladimir Putin. For the first half hour or so, Putin tried to justify his invasion of Ukraine by giving Tucker Carlson a Russian history lesson covering the last only 1,000 years.
I'll tell you. I'm coming to that. This briefing is coming to an end. It might be boring, but it explains many things.
I just don't know how it's relevant.
He spent most of the rest of the interview complaining that no matter how often he reached out to the West, he was always rebuffed.
At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, Do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now.
Now, according to Tucker Carlson, the US government tried to intervene in the past to stop him interviewing the Russian leader, which is quite a credible accusation when you see the hostility coming from the likes of Hillary Clinton and the mainstream media.
It shows me what I think we've all known. He's what's called a useful idiot. I mean, if you actually read translations of what's being said on Russian media, they make fun of him. I mean, he's like a puppy dog.
Okay, let's bring in our second panel now, and we have Marko Gasic, an international affairs commentator who thinks Putin does make some valid points about the West. And we also have Dmitri Alperovitch, author of the book World on the Brink. He believes Putin doesn't really know what he's doing in Ukraine. Welcome to both of you. Marko, if I could start with you. Our sources tell us that it was actually Vladimir Putin who asked for this interview with Tucker Carlson, not the other way around. Assuming that's true, why would Putin want this so badly?
Well, it's obvious that what he gets from this particular format is escape from the official narrative which dominates the Western media, the mainstream media everywhere. So were he to give an interview to a normal Western journalist who's got a boss and a boss's boss, he would have no ability to say more than 5 words without being interrupted whenever he was affected. He would be treated in all sorts of ways which would basically be aimed at stopping him make his explanation, explain what he's been doing for the last 20 years, why it came to this, and give some proper context. That all of that would be impossible to do in a normal Western mainstream media scenario where the journalists would be working to make their own reputation by destroying or making Putin look stupid in some way.
I heard the reports the following morning from the likes of the BBC and others, and within even their news section, they were criticising the interview, saying it was unchallenged, it wasn't much of an interview, and so on and so on. Do you think that Tucker Carlson failed in his duty as a journalist to challenge him? And do you think that Putin actually did achieve what he set out to achieve?
I don't think Carlson failed. Carlson wanted us to hear the voice that hadn't been heard, if you like, that wasn't being heard, that was being blocked every time by the mainstream media. You've got the Russian channel being banned. You've got basically one narrative which is allowed in the West in order to manufacture consent in the Western audience and support for incessant weaponization of the conflict zone in Ukraine. That's what he wanted to explain. And Tucker wanted to see how his explanation held up, and it left it to us, the intelligent laymen, to actually decide what we thought, and not be told by the mainstream media.
Okay. Dmitri, Marko was happy with the interview from both points of view. You?
Well, I don't think you can even call this an interview. It was a 2-hour monologue, effectively, with a few questions in between that Putin almost always ignored. And there was very little follow-up and an attempt to actually hold him to account. So I'm not quite clear why Putin needed to have Tucker Carlson there. He could have just gone out and did a video press conference on Twitter for 2 hours and gave a 30-minute history lesson going back 1,000 years, as you said. And he didn't really need Tucker there because he mostly ignored his questions anyway.
Tucker Carlson's got enormous reach as an independent journalist and isn't beholden to anybody. That's why he wanted to go to him.
Yeah, of course, he doesn't have broadcast platform anymore. It's only broadcast on Twitter. Who knows how many views it really got? They're unique because Twitter does not provide those statistics. Most people, I think, found this very boring and did not actually watch the whole 2 hours because you get lost very quickly unless you actually study Russian history in talking about what happened in the 900 AD.
Dmitri, just on viewing figures, it's quite difficult to compare. But the fact is, he was the top anchor on Fox, and when he went over to get his own show on X, I mean, he's scoring the kinds of viewing figures that Fox and other news networks can only dream of. The last time I looked, well, there were many millions of views of this interview. The problem is, as you say, the first half hour or so was a lecture on Russian history, and I wonder how many people, especially in the West, could actually stick with that, Marko.
I think this is more him talking, if you like, to posterity, to all the decision makers, to those socioeconomic groups that have some influence and at some point maybe minded to listen to what he said. It is true, as Dmitri said, that it went on for rather too long a time for most people to sit through it. But I think that when you listen to it, and indeed sometimes listen to it again, there's value in what he said. There's historic value in what he said.
We'll come to that in just a second. Dmitri, was there value in what he said? The first half an hour was essentially a historical justification for his invasion of Ukraine. Do you think he made a compelling case?
No, and in fact, he didn't actually tie the two together. He tried to make the case that Ukraine has not existed as a country until the last century or so. Not sure how that's relevant. What happened a century ago, what happened 900 years ago or 1,000 years ago is not quite relevant to modern history. Otherwise, we should be going back and rewriting borders all over Europe. We should be giving America back to Britain and so forth. Of course, that's a ridiculous argument. And he never actually made it outright by saying that Ukraine does not deserve to be as a state. He actually said that Russia recognized Ukraine as an independent country and continues to do so. So the most striking thing to me is that he never actually articulated why he invaded Ukraine. The closest he came is the accusation that Ukraine is supporting neo-Nazis and is commemorating World War II era collaborators with Nazi Germany like Stefan Bandera, the guy that was dead for 65 years.
Come in, Marko.
Well, he did articulate it. He said it was a combination of the fact that the Russians, whose territory had been given to this emergent Ukraine, had basically been treated in a terrible way by the emergent Ukrainian regime. And he also added to that the even more important detail that the treatment of Russians in Ukraine was now going to be added to by the treatment of Russians in Russia, because NATO was coming in without so much as any discussion, militarizing Ukraine for its war effort against Russia. He explained that it was the NATO factor more than the historical factor, though NATO depended on the false history to come in.
Actually, that is wrong, because Tucker Carlson pressed him on, did you invade it because of NATO expansion? He basically said, no, it's mostly because of neo-Nazis that have been dead for 65 years.
Let's move this on. After that historic sort of section, he then started to talk primarily about how he, since he took power in 2000, for 24 years, has been reaching out to the West only to be rebuffed. And he gave that example of Bill Clinton and the wish to join NATO. And I just wonder, Dmitri, is that true? Has he been talking to the democratically elected leaders, getting one answer, and then they go back to their intelligence communities and they have to come back with a negative answer?
No, I think it's true. In the early days, he certainly wanted a good relationship with the United States and the West. In fact, he was one of the first people to call President Bush after 9/11, offered support in American invasion of Afghanistan early on. What he expected in return, though, is something that Western leaders could not give him, which is a sphere of influence in Russia's abroad, allowing him to do whatever he wanted to do with countries like Ukraine and others, and that was never going to be tolerated by the West.
Mutual security. It wasn't about a sphere of influence. It was about no one being able to attack anyone else. The point was Russia was being excluded from the security architecture. As Putin put it, security was for the golden billion, by which he meant the collective West in the eyes of the West.
Dmitri, it's been quite a difficult week, or couple of weeks, for President Joe Biden, with him failing quite spectacularly in his press conference when he tried to defend his memory. And on the other side of the coin, we have President Putin doing a 2.5-hour interview. Yes, fairly unchallenged, but it would indicate that he seems to have the stamina for the job and Biden doesn't.
Well, I think that everyone knows that President Biden is in his 80s and is certainly not the same man that he used to be even early in his presidency. That's quite obvious to everyone. The question of whether he's going to win this election or not remains with American voters. I can tell you that there's no question that President Putin is going to win his election in Russia, given that virtually no one from the opposition has been allowed to run in it.
Marko, what does this past week mean for the two presidents?
A tale of two presidents. Well, Joe Biden, the mainstream media have come out of their own amnesia and discovered that Joe Biden has suffered from the same, is suffering from the same thing as they've been. But in fact, he's been suffering all term. It's marginally different now, and the real difference is that there's a chance that Donald Trump might win, and therefore now they're trying to work out how they could elegantly remove perhaps Joe Biden from the electoral contest. That seems to me why the sudden discovery of his condition. As for President Putin, he's 69, he's very active, so I'm not surprised that he's still doing well mentally as well.
Dmitri, we're coming towards the end of the program. I've just got a quick question to ask you about Tucker claiming that the US government tried to prevent him from interviewing Putin. First of all, do you think that's true? And secondly, why is the mainstream media, who have interviewed Putin in the past, so against Tucker doing the same?
Well, I think they're against Tucker not asking hard questions, not following up, and actually holding Putin to account, allowing him to go on and filibuster the question for 30 or 40 minutes. That I think was the problem. I think many people in the mainstream media would love to interview Putin and have lobbied requests to the Kremlin, which have been rebuffed. As far as whether the U.S. government tried to stop it or not, I'm somewhat dubious of the claim, because I think if they wanted to, they could have stopped him from traveling to Russia. They clearly didn't. So it's not clear what evidence exists for that accusation.
I would just conclude the show with saying that I noticed that the mainstream media do give a fairly easy ride, an unchallenged ride to the president of Ukraine, but they definitely have some sort of double standards going on there. But Dmitri and Marko, thank you both for your help today on the Nexus. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.